Welcome back, conservationists, to Chapter 9, Overexploitation with Mrs. Foes. So, in this chapter, we're going to look at how humans' overuse of different species causes them to be at risk for going extinct. This picture is all bison skulls in North America. So what is overexploitation? It's the overuse of species by humans to the point where it threatens their ability to survive, especially when we're taking out that genetic biodiversity and we're decreasing population size to the point where there's inbreeding. And about a third of vertebrate species are at risk right now of overexploitation. Another example other than the bison would be Atlantic cod, and so you can see their population decreased dramatically from overfishing. Here's a nice infographic of ways we can overexploit. We can overhunt. A really sad example of that is rhinos. Rhinos are hunted because their horns are worth thousands of dollars on the black market because there's supposed medicinal purposes in China for them. However, their horns are just keratin, which is like your fingernails, the hard keratin. And that protein has no different structure in them than fingernail clippings. So they're dying for no reason, but people are desperate to feed their families, and they know that they can make money by doing that. Unsustainable logging. So the rate that we're taking out rainforest is much higher than it can naturally establish itself. Overfishing, same idea. We like big predatory fish who help keep all the numbers in check, and we've taken out 90% of those, like tuna, for example. And then unregulated pet trade is huge. People want these exotic pets from different areas like birds and turtles, and they're taken out at higher rates than their population can sustain. So now we're going to look at the different types of exploitation. We're going to first look at commercial. So this is that we're doing it to make money. So here is a person from the WWF, World Wildlife Fund, watching them log trees to make sure they're doing it in a sustainable manner. The different industries from this is over 15 billion annually. It's far greater than that if you look at different agriculture as well. And unfortunately, we pay more money for things that are rare. So if a species is being overexploited to the point where there's very few, there's a greater incentive to get them and take them out of the wild because they're worth extra money. And then we're going to look at this idea of tragedy of the commons. Okay, so tragedy of the commons is basically the idea that if everybody only took one tree, great. It's a sustaining population of trees, of forest. Now, if one person took 2 trees, it's not a big deal. We're still fine. But if everybody took 2 trees, you wouldn't have any forest left, right? And so it's that idea that if everybody else is doing good, you're okay. You can do bad. But we don't check ourselves on that very well. A fun example that I've heard of teachers using is saying to their students, if 4 people put on this test that they'd like extra credit, I'll give it to them. But if more than 4 put that they want extra credit, no one gets extra credit. So you have to decide, is it worth trying to get it? Are you willing to make sure no one gets extra credit for the chance at you getting extra credit? So, one person littering, not that big a deal. Just like if one person doesn't vote, you probably won't change the vote by 1. But if everyone thinks that way, and you have thousands of people less voting, thousands of people littering, it makes a huge difference, right? And next we exploit just to maintain, to subsist. So food, clothing, fuel, shelter. What's this limited by? Human population. If our population isn't too large, we can do this. But if it gets too big, We can't use that resources at a sustainable rate. And what I mean by sustainable is at a rate that it can replenish itself. So what goes along with this is population growth models, especially for humans. Okay. So what we have here is over time and population density. And so there are two options, either the red line or the blue line, for how a population grows. Okay. This red line is called exponential growth. So that would be like if you had 2 cats and they had 5 kittens. And then each of those 5 kittens had 5 kittens. So first population is 2, second you've got 7, then you've got 32, and it grows at a rapid rate, right? The other, the blue, is the logistic curve. And you can see they both start out the same, and then the logistic slows down, and we reach this maximum density. That's K, or carrying capacity. So that's basically the amount of that species that the ecosystem can maintain. You'll see some interesting models of like lynx and hares where they'll both bounce up and down based on the other's population, but all along this carrying capacity. So if humans go past their carrying capacity, we're using resources too quickly, right? So an example of exponential growth model is bacteria. And so you can look at that cell dividing. In each division, you get twice as many. You go 2 to the x. And then you can look at after 12 hours, got 68 billion. Crazy stuff. Super exponential. There. Ideal, perfect conditions, there's nothing holding them back. But generally, there is a limiting factor, and that means that you can't keep growing exponentially forever. So the limiting factor is whatever is there in the lowest amount that those organisms need. So if it was the bacteria, it might be like nitrogen. So once the nitrogen ran out, you can't make more cells, right? And so this is an example of what plants need. And then, so it's kind of like looking at it like a barrel. Even if you have a ton of air and light, if you don't have any more potassium than this, that's all the more full you can fill your bucket. That's all the more plants you can grow. Okay. So this logistic growth is looking at that limiting factors. There's some factor that limits how many there are. And so in the case of seals, oftentimes it's the amount of space, right? Like they need territories, the males have harems of females, and they need space to do that. Once they run out of space, you can't really hold anymore. Right? And then carrying capacity, that's the number of individuals in the population that the environment can maintain. And so this is I really like this infographic, looking at your base level in the winter, and then how you reproduce in the spring. But like it can't hold that population forever. You'll have some get diseases. That's a big one if there's too many people or species next to each other. Disease spreads much quicker. There won't be enough food. They could starve. They get in accidents. They're hunted. Predators get them, etc. And then they're back down to their carrying capacity again. One of the reasons we have to hunt deer is because they don't have the normal limiting factors in the wild that they used to. There used to be a lot of large predators here, especially like mountain lions. And so having those large predators would actually decrease the amount of sickness because it would take out sick individuals, but they would also limit their population more, limit their movements. So without predators, they can go anywhere. They don't have to look at things, right? That's why we have to hunt them. If we didn't hunt deer and we don't have those predators, they would take out all of the small growth trees, so we wouldn't really see very many forests at all. And so let's look again at the human population. You'll see us doing an exponential growth curve, and now we're up past this. You can see we went down for a second with the plague, but we have increased rapidly. And so our growth curve, if you wanted to calculate it, you look at the death rate compared to the birth rate, right? So more births than deaths means you're growing. And the U.S. is actually not growing. If we didn't have new people coming in, our population would drop. And next, recreational. So we do that because we enjoy it. Hunting, fishing, and yes, there are ways to do this sustainably, but that again can be linked to the tragedy of the commons. Oh, if I take a few more fish than I'm allowed today, that's not a big deal, right? 2 fish, what matters there? Nothing. The population's fine. But if everybody does that, then the population crashes, right? And it's important, we'll look at this in a later chapter, but you have to pay your fees and make sure that you're doing it the right way so that those funds go into conservation. And last one here is watching. You might say, well, what does that matter? You're not actually hurting the individuals. Well, just human presence in places can affect how those species function, right? They might not go get the food that they would normally get. They might be awake and stressed more. One debate that I love bird watching. Okay? My husband and I will go out, we'll identify birds, we'll bring our binoculars, we'll bring our bird books. We're super cool. Anyways, one thing that you can do if you want to get birds to come in, if you hear them, you can play their call and they'll come in. And there's a debate in the bird watching world of whether you should do this or not, because them hearing another individual of their species can be very stressful because it's competition. And so they might come in and like the males will be like, who's there? I can fight you, and you might be stressed out for a while. And so they're saying that that's not a good idea to do probably. But on the other hand, you get to see them, and if you support wildlife initiatives, maybe it's okay. Interesting. Okay. This is interesting. So there's what's called the Pleistocene overkill hypothesis. So the Pleistocene ended about 10,000 years ago. And we had these Paleolithic, so these older humans, our ancestors who ate and killed a lot of megafauna, these really large birds, mammals. So this is a picture of a giant sloth that used to be in North America. Like, we used to have giant sloths, but you've never seen one. I've never seen one. I haven't seen mammoths or saber-toothed tigers. All these large things that used to be present are gone because one of the ideas is we killed them all, which I'm sure we helped. That is interesting. And so there we took out these large species that we no longer see. And then trophic cascades. So if you take out the top predators, we talked about this a little bit. So the deer would eat, if there's too many deer, they'll spread disease. They'll eat all these small growing trees so you won't see new forest growth. So if we don't have predators, you can do hunting. If you manage it well, make sure people aren't taking too many. Okay. And then incidental exploitation. So this is, you didn't really mean to do it, but it happened. A lot of these examples are fishing. So bycatch is a big one. If we have a net and we're catching fish, anything else that can go in there can get caught, right? So an example would be like dolphins or sea turtles who need to come up to breathe. And if they don't come up in time, they'll suffocate. Another one would be boating, right? If you hit a manatee, you didn't mean to, but you did. Or cars. Cool. And then indirect human structure, so like roads, dams, canals. Exotic species we'll look at, invasives in the next chapter, but these are my 2 cats. They're wonderful. I have a dog too. I should put him up here as well because he's invasive. If they get to go outside and they weren't watched by me, they would be killing lots of songbirds. And they'll also compete with native species, right? So, consequences of exploitation. Some individuals in the population are going to be more likely to be susceptible. if they have interesting genetics, if they're really big like fish or deer, sex like deer, if you got a big buck, you're going to have more praise than if you get a doe, right? And then they can have these huge effects on the ecosystem. We're going to look at keystone species there. So a keystone species is a species that has a big effect on their ecosystem. Sometimes they're even ecosystem engineers. So like a beaver who engineers his ecosystem by building dams, right? Large predators are oftentimes keystone species because they're going to help maintain all the other populations of their prey items. Elephants, this is Valley. He was the prettiest elephant. And so elephants will form pathways for other species to use. They'll help tortoises be able to get into areas to eat. They'll take out specific types of plants. They'll shape that ecosystem. You might be wondering what's going on up here. Well, sea stars are actually predators that can help shape their environment, as are sea otters. So the vicious, adorable sea otter. They live in kelp forests, and one of the things that you'll find there is sea urchins, and they eat a lot of them. If they didn't, the sea urchins would eat all of the kelp forest. So they help maintain kelp forests. Here is a lovely prairie dog. They do burrows that other species will often use. They're a prey item for species like the black-footed ferret. This is a burrowing owl. How cute is that? They use those spaces that prairie dogs make. So all of these species have a larger impact on their environment than the others there. Now let's look at a few examples. You can use policy as a tool. We'll look at this more in the last chapter, but CITES is the International Trade Organization. So they determine what is legal to ship between countries. And what they found was after they made this Conservation Act where they can't trade parrots, they found that both legal and illegal trade went down. So you might think like, oh, well, if we make it illegal, more people are going to do it illegally, right? And then it'll just stay high. But what they found was the more legal trade, the easier it was for illegal trade to go on as well. So by making it illegal, they had less trade overall and less illegal trade. So now let's look at an example in Cambodia. Okay, a big issue there is overharvesting of wildlife and then forestry, which is an issue most places. And so what Conservation International did was they told the different local peoples that if they did a good job of maintaining the land and not over-harvesting, that they would give them incentive to keep doing it, like 8 water buffalo after your year if they did a good job. And so what they found was there was some illegal clearing, but less than normal. And so they said, hey, you didn't do a great job, you only get 6. But then the community was like, oh, well, we'll do better, give us more again, right? And so by helping them out economically, giving them tools to do their own work, there's a really good documentary that I'm blanking on right now that shows that like just 8 isn't enough. You need to give them a chance to make their own economic choices. Right? Pretty cool. And then another, so sea turtles, we talked about a little bit how they go towards moonlight. And when there was an issue that in Solomon Islands, they were taking the sea turtle females and their eggs. And so then what they did was they set up and they made the villagers responsible. And they had them reporting the sea turtles, monitoring their success, and then they would receive money if they did a good job. Okay, and then the last slide is Calvin and Hobbes, that you can check that out on the PowerPoint. Have a lovely day.